Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good evening. Greetings from AmCham, Sri Lanka. Today, on the third episode of our Be Inspired series, created and curated to provide you with learning, leadership, and strategic inspiration during these challenging times, we're privileged to present a discussion showcasing the resilience, the performance, and impact of the apparel sector in Sri Lanka, despite and through the challenges of the ongoing pandemic resultant business and economic environment. During this discussion that will be moderated by AmCham Sri Lanka President and Trade and Investment Evangelist Prasanta Jayamaha, we will establish and explore the influence and effect of the apparel sector on the Sri Lankan economy, discuss the performance of the sector and the strategies and lessons learned over the last 2 years, and also discuss briefly the current and emerging opportunities for the sector in the context of its impact on the stability of the Sri Lankan economy. In case you're not aware, the apparel sector accounts for 32% of the country's exports, with over 350,000 direct employed and a further 700,000 indirectly through the supporting infrastructure. It is largely a female-based industry, with these ladies accounting for 78% of the industry workforce. Now, our panel today needs very little detail in introduction. 4 of the largest apparel exporters that collectively employ over a third of the apparel industry workforce and account for around 40% of apparel exports. They currently serve on the executive committees of the industry bodies, with 3 of them as office bearers on the Sri Lanka Association of Apparel Exporters. Arun Hydramani, Director of the Hydramani Group, Shirendra Lawrence, Executive Director of MAS Holdings, Hasi Boma, Executive Director of Moose Clothing under the Brandix Group, and Jivit Senaratna, Senior Manager Business Analysis at the Star Garments Group. Gentlemen, welcome to the AmCham Sri Lanka platform. It's our pleasure to host you this evening. Now, before I hand over to our moderator, a quick reminder that we will be taking limited audience questions in the last half hour of the session. So do post your questions in the Q&A box, or if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can post it on the comments box and we'll take it up. We will share it with our panelists. Mr. Jayamaha, over to you.
Thank you, Rai. Good evening and welcome to the audience and the distinguished panelists for this evening's Be Inspired series. As Rai mentioned, our topic in focus today is indeed an inspiring one. The apparel sector is Sri Lanka's golden child of export. From small beginnings in the 1970s, rapid evolution in the 1990s, and now Sri Lanka's largest export product from Sri Lanka. We are privileged to have 4 leaders from the leading apparel companies on this panel today. The COVID pandemic turned our lives and livelihoods upside down. In an instant, there was disruptions to mobility, from free moment to absolute lockdowns. Workplaces, from offices to work from home, factory floors totally disrupted, airports and ports closed. The list is extensive. Whilst most just wanted to survive, these businesses focused on making use of the opportunities. Learning from them and what made this possible is what makes this meeting today very exciting for me and hopefully you. We are here to speak to 4 apparel industry leaders representing the Sri Lanka Apparel Exporters Association. We intend to discuss and unpack how this industry not only survived, but managed to pivot and grow during this period. Pandemic resilient companies is what encapsulates the human spirit of perseverance. So this evening, let's hear from them, let's learn from them, and let's be inspired. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this evening. As we move to our first round of questions, I would like to discuss with each panelist the apparel industry as a whole and the impact that the pandemic has had on it. Let's start with you, Arun. Arun, would you mind giving the audience a brief overview of the influence and size of the apparel sector on the Sri Lankan economy, please?
Hi, Prashanta. Sure. And first of all, thank you to you and the AmCham board and team for having us on board this evening. I've been in the apparel industry for over 18 years now, but it's really been over the past few years through my involvement with the Sri Lankan Apparel Export Association and also our apex body JAF, the Joint Apparel Association Forum, that I've realized the extent that our industry, the extent of the impact that our industry has on our economy. I think, as was mentioned earlier, there are a number of factors. There are first some tangible factors. We are 6% of the country's GDP. We consistently rank around 40% of our exports of the country. And coming out of the pandemic, where a lot of industries have been very negatively affected, we've been fortunate that we've been able to revive the industry relatively rapidly. And we're on track this year. We're hoping to achieve $5 billion of exports even this year, and hoping to grow on this base from 22 onwards. We've also mentioned that our industry is a major employer within the manufacturing sector. We're the largest employers, 350,000 direct employees, and over 700,000 indirects. And our sector is not just the apparel manufacturing. There are many other sectors involved. We have a dynamic raw materials sector which is growing, including fabrics, accessories, etc. We also have a strong association with the logistics sector, and that is becoming extremely important with all of the disruptions in supply chains. Our collaboration with the logistics sector is very important. And also innovation. There's a lot of innovation both within our member companies and also for the industry as a whole, and we need to continue that. And aside from these tangible figures, Prashanta, there's also a lot of intangibles. One thing that I've realized, for our industry is there's been a history of collaboration. You'll see on this panel, a lot of us, our companies, we compete for the same customers. And we're all independent companies, but we have a lot of collaboration as an industry, and I think that example has been set over a number of years. And it's not only collaboration among companies, member companies, but we collaborate with other trade associations, with government bodies as well. And I think this is a good example for other industries. This has allowed us to really make the Sri Lankan industry where we punch above our weight on a global scale. So I think it's been documented. A number of brands, and retailers, they rely on Sri Lanka. We're known as an ethical and reliable manufacturer. Where we're leading when it comes to sustainability and innovation. And a lot of brands come to us, when they want to pilot a new project, when they want to set an example for some of their other vendors in other parts of the world, they come to Sri Lanka. So I think these are things that we should be proud of. There's a lot of hard work that we have to build on, but I think our foundation is strong, and hopefully we can build on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Arun. Mind-boggling stats: $5 billion, 40+% of the exports, and being the ethical sourcing destination and being branded. It sounds very exciting and well done. Congratulations to everyone on this panel to be part of that industry. Shirendra, over to you. The COVID pandemic has had a wide range of effects on all businesses and industries. As such, could you share a summary of the impact of the pandemic on the performance of the apparel sector in Sri Lanka over the last 2 years, please?
Hi, good evening, Prashanta. Thanks. Thank you for having me on the program as well. And yeah, sure. Thanks, Arun, for that intro as well on the in the industry. And I'll sort of try and pick up on that, on what's been going on in the industry over the last 18 to 20 months. So I think the first impact of COVID-19 actually on our industry, the Sri Lankan apparel industry, was even before it hit us directly. It was because of the interruption of our supply chains very early in 2020. And this was as a result of the pandemic affecting China, which plays a huge part in the supply chain of our apparel industry. And that happened at the end of 2019, and the impact came across to us very, very early in the year 2020, as our eastern supply chains were impacted in the run-up. And this was also compounded by, this was the run-up to the Chinese New Year, which was in January. And traditionally, the industry has had to stock up materials at that time because China grinds to a standstill for about a month. So this meant that we were already into the challenging process of constant replanning of production and trying to balance customer expectations with supply chain interruptions due to the Chinese situation, even before we actually saw the pandemic ourselves. So when it hit us directly in March, as we'll all recall, it resulted in a nationwide knockdown mid-month, and this in turn led to unprecedented disruption, with commercial manufacturing being completely shut down till May. Even though the curfews and so on weren't fully lifted at that time, there were some limited operations that started up. In the interim, there were, of course, some special approvals given to the industry to manufacture PPE for the local health sector from around mid-April. But at the same time, since our ultimate markets were also impacted, there was an appreciation of the issue by our customers. And in a sense, this helped ease the pressure. But then there were also requests for order cancellations, pushbacks, and so on, leaving us with some serious challenges as we work in a make-to-order environment where products are developed each season based on new designs, and raw materials then are only ordered at that point, very much against confirmed orders. So these cancellations left many in the sector with materials that they couldn't use, and also having to negotiate with material suppliers on liabilities for orders placed but not delivered, and likewise. And then on top of that, many of the customers requested immediate discounts. I think the word at the time was to share the pain. And for us, this was something that we didn't prefer, but it was a lesser of two evils. So we had no option but to accept them. So it put some financial challenges on our industry as well. In some cases, these sort of requests were even applied retrospectively for orders recently delivered. So it left us with lots of challenges. But having said all of this, on the positive side, the industry in Sri Lanka has been built mostly on strategic customer relationships rather than transactional order placement. So this meant that discussions on solutions to the issues were to some extent consultative, and there were some compromises on both sides, which made the burdens just a little bit easier. The result of all of this was that despite the value of apparel exports declining nearly 50% in that second quarter of 2020, as against the same period in 2019, this recovered partially to a decline of around 20% by the fourth quarter. And we ended up the year at about just over 4 billion, about 4.1 billion US versus 5.3 billion in the year before. So a net decline for the year was something in the region of about 22%, perhaps a lot less than we would have expected, when we were sitting and looking at the situation at the end of, as we came out of the lockdowns in May, June. Moving to 2021, more bringing you right up to date, the challenges both with the pandemic and also in our interactions with our customers have been a little bit different. In terms of the situation on the ground in Sri Lanka, the impact of the second wave at the end of 2020 and the third wave that followed post Aurudu this year has been, I would say, more unpredictable, and we really have had to learn to operate in what now seems to become the new norm. One thing I must mention is that the industry has always come together and worked collectively in times of adversity like these, and there has been a huge amount of sharing of best practices, and this has helped companies who would have otherwise have struggled to keep at as best as possible to their customer commitments, whilst at the same time obviously focusing on the safer working environments, which has been critical. Most of the internal processes and procedures have had to be written through this time, from physically altering the entire production flows to catering to social distancing mandates, to establishing secure bubbles, health checks, and establishing remote working wherever possible. So the magnitude of the change has been significant. This has meant that discipline of adhering to these protocols have also had to be established, monitoring systems put in place, and this has meant a significant change of behavior. Having to do all of this without the vaccination process in place for our factories, factory-based associates till at least 3 or 4 months ago has been additionally challenging. But the biggest issue at the end of the day is managing customer expectations, because unlike in 2020, their markets have to a greater extent bounced back, and they need and expect us to satisfy their consumers' demands. And these two have changed, because the consumer demand has changed over this time. At the same time, we know that we have to continue to compete against regional and global competitors if we are to retain the relationships that we've really worked very hard to establish over the last 20 to 30 years. And some of those competitors that we're up against may not be facing the same issues as we are at the same time. So it's meant the playing field hasn't always been level. But nevertheless, we've ended up in a decent place, as Arun was just mentioning. Currently, most businesses are operating at 80 to 90% of their 2019 capacities. And if the year-to-date performance continues till the remainder of the year, we should end up maybe just a little bit short of the 5 billion that we're hoping, 4.7, 4.8 billion, which would still be an improvement of about 13% on last year, and leave us maybe just about 10% short of the 5.3 billion in 2019. So all in all, I think it's been a tough journey, but we've been hanging in there, and credit to everybody for making that happen.
Credit, certainly, Shirendra. It's always nice to hear positive news in this environment. So anytime the word growth is being discussed here, in this, especially as you mentioned, the very prohibitive and difficult environment to have sustainable production. So yeah, it's good to hear that. And I'm just carrying on. Shirendra, I'm moving on to you. We discuss speed, agility, flexibility. It's something that we speak about, and especially during pandemics, that's very important. Could you share with us the changes that had to be made in the way that MAS runs its businesses, and perhaps starting with the adoption of working from home environment, and any takeaways that are now part of the ongoing sustainable growth plans of the company?
Sure, Prasanta. Thank you. Yeah. Well, the first wave was hugely challenging because it happened so fast. It thrust us into a work from home environment, which we were essentially unprepared for. Fortunately, we, like a lot of companies, perhaps over the last 2 or 3 years, had piloted some sort of remote working flexi hours policy, which meant that we had in place some general guidelines. We understood the different communication platforms available, and we have much of the infrastructure in place for people to work from home. So there was some of that done beforehand, but it was by and large unexpected. We certainly had not expected for this to have to transition to a full-time work from home effort. And as the first wave extended from 1 week to the next, and then from 1 month to the next, we started to realize huge gaps in personal connectivity. And this extended to a void in wider team engagement across departments and individuals, as people now really only connected with those that they had to do with directly during the course of their routine day-to-day business. So we had to take a number of actions to mitigate these issues, including town halls with senior leaders, talking to employees about the impact that this was having in the business, and helping them to understand how we were pivoting on our business plans to adapt to the situation. Our human resource teams focused on staying in touch with people, appointing department representatives, and providing some administrative support where needed to ensure that our employees working from home were provided with similar levels of support to what they would get in office. Providing employees with data connections and conferencing software and so on was the easy part. The tougher challenges were to establish a real working model, procedures and ways to engage with teams to keep them motivated and productive. Beyond this, each team found the equations that worked for them. We had to give people freedom and flexibility to arrive at solutions that worked in their circumstances, their units, rather than a strict set of rules that everyone in the company had to follow. And I think this extended to every aspect of the business, where previously it was all rules and regs, and it became, you'll just have to flex, and we'll trust our leadership to do the best they can. For example, Jeevit was talking about product design. So similarly, digital product design, whether it was the 3D sampling that Jeevit was talking about, or whether it was other aspects of the design and development, digital prototyping, sampling, that things that we had just not done before to anything like the same extent. Even in our businesses, we had to move very quickly in that direction. To break the monotony, our teams were encouraged to have some fun. This actually happened a little later on, where you realize that this breakdown on connectivity of people was becoming a serious issue. People had moved on from the company. You didn't even know they had gone. people had changed roles and so on. So we got into some sort of things like virtual coffee breaks, online engagement activities and competitions, and compensate for the loss of personal social interaction that they had whilst at work. I mean, we've been an organization that's always focused on education. So, we had at a certain point to get back to education and say that we have to get on with the education. So training programs and so on, constant communication, on how to stay safe, all of these things we had to try and pivot to how do you continue the good work that you have been doing, whilst protecting yourself, and your loved ones, and even education on spotting fake and legitimate news sources and just helping people to stay up with the times. There was focus on individual physical, emotional, and mental health, with line managers being educated on new responsibilities that they had to ensure that their teams maintained a healthy work-life balance. I mean, some points you had people saying, we're working from home, we never get a break. It just goes on nonstop. And, there was an education process that went in with that. But whilst all this was going on, our leaders, as with any crisis, had to remain focused on the balance of economic sustainability of the organization, whilst giving top priority to the safety and the protection of our employees whose job roles required them to return to work. There was the workforce that had to get back to the factories and so on. So we had to find those balance. I mean, the pandemic surely brought upon it with it some new challenges that we would never have envisaged in the past. And I believe as a company, and this extends to the industry, that we have reacted to those responsibly and professionally, and that there are learnings, some good, some bad, that will stand us in good stead for the future. And I think it's a good opportunity to really extend a sincere appreciation to all of our employees at our company, MS Holdings, as well as to those across the industry at large, for responding to the call to work, as their contributions and commitment extend beyond our individual businesses for sure, and to the continued prominent positioning of the Sri Lankan apparel industry. And it's also been of national importance at this very challenging time. So it's been a time of new learnings, and I mean, there's nothing like a good crisis to help you to think about how you go forward. And I think a lot of those learnings will carry forward, Prashanta.
Thank you, Shirendra. That was certainly insightful. We want to move to the next round of questions. I want to focus on the local retail aspects of these businesses. Whilst you represent large apparel manufacturing groups, most on this forum have also ventured into the space of running your own brands. Moose Clothing, Amante, LICC being familiar clothing and retail brands for most Sri Lankans. Could you give a quick snapshot view of the challenges these brands have experienced and how you have addressed them in order to remain operational?
Explaining our brand's been around for 10 or 12 years, and it's predominantly sold in India. It's a lingerie brand, and the Sri Lanka presence is perhaps 15 or 20% of the business. The bulk of the business is in India. And in fact, a few years ago, we actually transitioned the management of the business to India, so it was closer to the market. The interesting thing is that we have a much bigger physical presence, and it has the distribution channels in the two countries tend to work quite differently. In Sri Lanka, the consumers tend to prefer and work more through our exclusive outlets and somewhat through modern retail stores. Whereas in India, it's much more traditional retail focused, in the rural areas and so on. And there is some extent of modern retail departmental stores. But in both countries, the e-com piece was relatively small. In India, it was probably not much more than about 10%. At the onset of the pandemic. In Sri Lanka, it was just a very low single digits. It may also be the category. The category is a category that people probably like to touch and feel a little bit more than certain other categories. So that was why it was. But certainly, obviously, with the pandemic, there was this change happened in both geos. E-com took off in a big way in India. Today, it accounts for about a third of the business, and it's a bigger business now. So that means it's given us a whole lot of other challenges in terms of how do you change the distribution systems, because the distribution systems, the way stocks are managed, and so on, are very, very different between the e-com, traditional retail, modern retail, and exclusive outlets. And even in Sri Lanka, the amount of business that transacts through e-com has increased significantly. It's probably about 10% of the business now, which is a big change. But in Sri Lanka, the consumers seem to still prefer to visit stores and see the products. Beyond that, there's been we've had to, the product itself has had to shift from fashion to function. I mean, it's very much a fashion product before the pandemic, and we've had to move to functional because people's needs and demands have changed. So that's meant product portfolios have had to be redevised, redesigned, and so on. So it's been a journey of some interest. I think the biggest challenge that probably we had was with the people, because particularly in India, where the brand is very much in rural areas, we've got a large supporting sales team out in the field, and they were probably impacted more by COVID than anything else in the regions they were, and we weren't necessarily as close to hand to help them, because obviously we have our presence we have about 15 exclusive outlets in the cities, but not necessarily in the rural areas. And and then the office-based teams have the work from home challenges and so on. So essentially it was a different bag of interesting challenges. And I think what I would say is, for us, the brand was at a point of its evolution where it was a good time to do a check adjust, and the check adjust was forced upon us. And I think we'll come out of the crisis in a much better position than we actually went into it.
That's positive, and yeah, definitely, it's good to know. Exciting news, gentlemen. Thank you for sharing that. We are moving to our final round of questions, and I just want to do a strategy deep dive on a few areas that might help the audience, especially those from outside the apparel industry. Shirendra, I'm going to start with you. As you know, trade shifts is something that AmCham Sri Lanka is very passionate about. You are the secretary of AmCham of Sri Lanka. We have conducted research, reports to document, and even try to capture some of the trade shifts that are taking place in Asia right now. This is where large industries are moving out of countries such as China to other manufacturing destinations in Asia. And these are multi-billion-dollar total investments when you look at the entire supply chain. The trade shifts are due to COVID-19, labor cost changes, inflation, geopolitical alliances, tariffs, and various other related matters. So Shirendra, from a Sri Lankan apparel standpoint, do you see this as an opportunity or a challenge, and what can we do to win in a post-COVID environment?
Okay, so I don't have the crystal ball, but I'll have a shot at it. I think, Prashanta, we saw the opportunity for trade to shift from the east, perhaps in the direction of Sri Lanka, across all industries, as you know. More in light of some of the geopolitical issues that were happening maybe over the last 3 to 4 years rather than the pandemic. And I guess we believe that these would have started by now. In our industry, we have not quite seen that happening as yet. What we think may have happened also is that with the pandemic's onset, brands that may well have been planning these shifts have deferred their plans, because obviously managing more than one crisis at a time, obviously these trade shifts are triggered by situations in their own countries, tariffs going up on Eastern products and so on. And movement as part of a strategy when you've got something like a pandemic is something that's a high risk. So we think that these have probably been delayed because we have not seen this happening so far. It's our expectation that this will probably pick up post the pandemic, or at least once we get back to whatever the new norm is, and organizations are more settled, markets are more settled, organizations are more settled. As we've talked about all along, our exports are 5 billion plus or minus. And this only accounts for something like 1% of apparel trade globally. It's a very, very small figure. And therefore, if there's any shift of trade, the opportunities have to be significant for us, because a very, very small percentage shift, even decimal points of a percentage shift in our direction, will have a significant impact on the country. So I think the simple answer is, of course, it's an opportunity. The question then is, what are the opportunities that we see? That what are our cells that we can get out there and give to the market to help this trade come in our direction. And we, as through the association, have been doing a lot of work over the last few years to strengthen our position as an ethical sourcing destination. It's been talked. Jeev talked about it very early in the program. I think from a social responsibility point of view, we've been seen for many, many years to be a preferred location. And more recently, the environmental sustainability has big plan. We as an industry, we're well known for reliability and quality because that's how we have grown, and with these strategic partnerships that Arun alluded to earlier on. These are big names that we can get out there and say, so and so is in Sri Lanka, how come you're not? To support that, we have even at our shop floor levels, we have a very highly skilled and literate workforce, which makes life much more attractive, particularly in these digital times. Everything is about tech and so on. And more recently, we've become pretty well known as a country for innovation, end-to-end design to delivery solutions, rather than just as pure manufacturers. And of course, on top of that, we always talk about the fact that we're logistically very well positioned on the main shipping routes from east to west. So there's a lot going for the country, which we've been plugging for a while. And I think now is the time to do a little bit more of that. From a national point of view, that we've already connected, and this because we've done a lot of this work through AmCham or in collaboration with AmCham to speak with the relevant government and other authorities to see what they can do to help us to unlock some of the opportunities that or challenges that might be in the way. We have very limited trade advantages compared with other countries, some of our neighboring countries. So that's a big one. We don't have any trade benefits going to the United States, which is, shares, which as a single entity is now our biggest market, because with UK moving out of Europe as an entity probably slips into a sort of second place. 40% of our trade goes in the direction of the US. We have nothing, we do that on the back of no trade advantages. If anything was to come through at any time, that'll make a big difference. Mm-hmm. Of course, within the country, there's policy, the regulations, for direct foreign, I think it wouldn't be a bad thing to encourage more direct foreign investment. At this time, it's been a while since since we've seen significant growth. We already see the government taking a lot of initiatives on incentives for verticality. Verticality has been the name of the game in our industry. If we want to move forward, COVID, if nothing else, has strengthened that, because obviously having your supply chain close to hand is really important. And thankfully, in our industry, the government is being supportive of this, looking at setting up a dedicated zone and so on and so forth. And so hopefully there'll be better infrastructure support for that. And then, anything else that the government can do, we've been asking in terms of, whether it is energy costs or, leveraging on more sustainable initiatives, support carbon neutral and the like. So I think the efforts towards the government to create the supporting infrastructure or attractiveness to make the industry grow further, along with the effort that the association through the Sri Lanka Apparel Exporters Association and with JAF support we're making to make a bigger sell of the country. I think these are the things that hopefully will make a difference. And if it all goes to plan, maybe 8 billion, which has been a figure on the radar for some time, is a definite possibility. These things could happen quite quickly in the post-COVID era. And, maybe we could put a North Star of even 10 billion out there. So we're encouraged, we're excited, and, hopefully we'll see some of this coming to fruition after the crisis. Sri Lanka's always been resilient, and we've generally come out of crises stronger than most. So we keep our fingers crossed that we'll be able to do this coming out of this crisis and leverage on that opportunity of trade shift when it happens.
And Shirendra, maybe I'll open it up to all the panelists. I'm going to jump into maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience, if you don't mind. I'll share maybe a question, and I'll let the panelists decide on who should answer it. The first one is on logistics, and I know we touched on this briefly before the webinar started. We have 2, one from Chandra Kumar and the second from Mudita, both alluding the same thing. The question goes, with the ever increasing demand and logistic challenges, do you think it's time now for a forum like JAF to take the lead to formalize a strategy to get all its members to work out a collaborative model for key logistic partners to address the import and export logistic challenges? And the second part of that, Mudita's question goes on the same. Vendors and customers are facing this challenge of the pandemic, logistics. What kind of solution do we have or plan to have? Over to the forum.
I'm happy to take a stab at it. I think the reason it's being brought up is because it's kind of flavor of the month at the moment. This hasn't been a big issue for us as an industry by and large. We've had adequate sailings from the east. There have been reasonably economical air freight routes on commercial routes that could be tapped into as and when needed. And whilst it comes at a cost, obviously at a premium cost, by and large, the industry has not had a fundamental problem with incoming raw material logistics up to now. And likewise on the outgoing side for our customers, and most of the industry supplies our customers either on an FOB, on a free carrier or whatever basis. So the freight outgoing is by and large consolidated. Again, this comes back to strategic brands working in Sri Lanka. So they consolidate and send out. Right at the moment in the post, or in the present phase of COVID, this has turned out to be a bigger problem than ever before. We've never seen this issue that we have seen in the last month at the moment. And this is not just for apparel. This will be affecting anyone who has imports from the East. The delays of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and in fact, a lot of unpredictability because of the limited vessel sailings. It's got a compound number of reasons. It's triggered by obviously post-pandemic. There's freight in different parts of the world that has to be moved, and the freight companies have adjusted their schedules to deal with the overall global situation. Maybe it's even related to more lucrative routes for them to put their vessels on. They probably lost a lot of money in the height of the pandemic, and so the economics come into play. And on top of that, there is the COVID situation. Most of the people who are, if anyone's on the call from the apparel industry, know that there's a particular vessel that's on the way from the east that was bringing a lot of freight in for our industry that's been impacted by COVID en route and is now having to do a quarantine at sea. And these things are things we've not had to deal with in the past. On top of that, we're hearing of COVID regulations in other parts of the world that are delaying movement of vessels. I was told just yesterday that there was a significant number of ships berthed outside one of the ports in the US, Los Angeles, if I recall correctly, where they are now imposing a quarantine pre-coming into the port. So these sort of things that are going on at the moment have created a lot of disruption, and it's therefore a subject of the moment. Companies are having to look at solutions at the present time, and they're difficult, because at the end of the day, if your sea freight routes are adequately blocked, that you have to air freight a large amount of product in, the regular air freight routes are not going to be able to cater for them, and this then moves you towards freighters and the like. And in fact, I believe we certainly as a company are in the first stages of discussion of how do we make freighting in through freighters economical. The problem is for any individual company to do that, it is very, very difficult to make that work. If nothing else, you have the whole issue of how does a freighter go back? What does it take back in that same direction? Because by and large, our products are going in the other direction. So I think the question is very valid, that it is a good time for the industry to take a look at something new in this space. Whether this will be a short-term, medium-term issue, or whether this is going to persist, I'm not sure. But I think moving towards consolidation of freight on routes that are more dependable, particularly at this time when our strategic customers expect us to react and support them come what may, I think it's something we're going to have to think about. But it is hot off the press at the moment. My expectation is it's a good area, and it's a good call out that industry association, and it's not just our industry association, it may be a collaboration of industry associations to say, why don't we get some routes going and have some formality of consolidation amongst ourselves. So I think it's a good call out, and it's something we'll have to address.
Thank you, Shirendra. And with that, we come to the end of this insightful webinar on the apparel sector, and especially meeting 4 pandemic resilient companies. The advice and insight shared will definitely help us as a nation, industry, and even single businesses to focus on making a better tomorrow and stronger tomorrow. Thank you for joining us tonight. Good night and God bless you. Over to you, Rai, to do the formal closure.
Thank you, Prasanta. Well, that's all we have time for this evening. It's been our privilege to bring you this inspiring and enlightening session, which we hope will do exactly what this series sets out to do, which is to inspire you. If we missed your questions, because there were so many of them, we do apologize. We tried to curate and club as many of the questions as possible together. And I do believe that we were able to touch on most, if not all, of the related issues that were raised. On behalf of our panelists, the AmCham Sri Lanka and the AmCham Sri Lanka team, our usual reminder, of course, as we go, to keep your physical distance, masks on, hand sanitize, immunity boosted, fingers crossed and spirits up. Stay safe, everyone. Good night and God bless.